On her first night in that house, Bella Hart heard a child crying somewhere above her, and in the morning, every servant in the kitchen told her she had dreamed it. Before we begin, tell me in the comments which town or city you are listening from. I always love to see where you all are. She had come to Brantham House on a Tuesday in October with everything she owned in a bundle the size of a loaf of bread, a comb, 2 shifts, a pair of stockings mended so often that the mending had been mended, and a small tin whistle that had been her mother's, which she had carried since she was 6 and had never once played where anybody could hear. Bella was 22. She had been born in a laundry, raised in a workhouse from the age of 7, and put into service at 12, and she had learned early the one lesson the world teaches girls in her position and never has to repeat. Nobody is coming for you. You will be exactly as safe as you make yourself, and not 1 hour safer. 3 weeks before, she had been a housemaid in a respectable establishment in Bath. Then a brooch went missing from her mistress's dressing table, and the lady's own son had taken it, and everybody in that house knew he had taken it, and Bella had been turned off at 8 in the morning without a character. Without a character, a servant cannot be hired. That is not a hardship. That is a sentence. She had walked a good part of the way to London and stood at 11 back doors in 4 days. And at the 11th she was so tired that when the housekeeper asked whether she had a character, she said, "No, ma'am, I have not, and I will not tell you a lie about it, because you will find me out, and then I shall have wasted your time as well as my own." Mrs. Tarrant, housekeeper of Brantham House, looked at her for a long moment over her spectacles. "We are short in the scullery," she said at last. "It is the worst place in the house. The pay is £9 a year, and you will be up at 5. If you steal so much as a candle, I will have you before a magistrate myself." "I will not steal," said Bela. Mrs. Tarrant made a note in a book. "We shall see. Nan will show you where you sleep." That was how Bella came to be lying awake at 2 in the morning in a bed under the roof, listening. The sound was not loud. It came down through the house the way water finds its way down through a wall, a child crying, not the furious crying of a child in a temper, something much worse than that and much quieter, the crying of a small person who has already learned that crying does not bring anybody. It went on for perhaps 10 minutes, then it stopped, and Bella lay with her eyes open until the grey came into the window. At breakfast, she asked. The kitchen went very still. The cook did not look up from her board. A footman found something interesting in his tea, and Mrs. Tarrant, standing at the door with her keys, said, in a voice like a door closing, "You will have dreamed it. It is a strange house to sleep in the first night." "Yes, ma'am," said Bela. Later, on the back stairs, Nan caught her sleeve. Nan was 17, thin, freckled, and could not keep a secret if you paid her, which was the only reason Bela ever learned anything at all in that house. "You did not dream it," Nan whispered. "Then what is it?" Nan looked up the stairwell and down it. "There is a child," she said, "at the top of the east stairs. We are not to speak of her, and we are not to go up, and if you are wise, you will forget you asked." Brantham House stood in Grosvenor Street, 4 stories of pale stone, and everything inside it worked the way a good clock works. The silver was cleaned on Thursdays. The lamps were trimmed before 6. The Duke's post came at 9 and his carriage at 10, and the whole machine turned without a squeak, and Bella, scrubbing pans in a stone room below the street, understood within a week that it turned around a hole. Nobody used the east stairs. There was a door at the bottom of them, painted the same colour as the wall, and everybody in that house walked past it every day of their lives as though it were a wall. The Duke of Brantham was Richard Alden, 34 years old, worth 20,000 a year, and he had not been to a ball or a card party or a private dinner in 3 years, and he had a face on him like a shut gate. She heard the crying again on the 11th night and the 14th and the 16th. On the 16th she got up. She afterward gave herself several sensible reasons and believed none of them. The truth was simpler. Bela Hart had spent 11 years in a building where children cried at night, and the answer every time was that somebody in a warm room a long way off had decided it was better not to go. She went barefoot with a stub of candle. The east stairs were narrow and cold, and there was dust on them, real dust, in a house where the treads were scoured twice a week. Nobody had gone up in a long time. At the top there was a landing and 3 doors, and under one of them a line of very faint light. Bela opened it. The room beyond was clean, and that was somehow worse than dirt would have been. A proper nursery, with a rug and a low fender and a shaded lamp, everything tidy and cold and correct, and not one thing in it that a child had touched. No toys on the floor, no cup out of place, nothing scattered, nothing loved. And sitting up in the small bed against the far wall, entirely silent now, watching the door with enormous dark eyes, was a little girl of about 3. She did not cry out when the door opened. She did not call. She only looked and went on looking, with an attention so complete and so old that Bela stopped where she stood with her hand still on the latch. "Hello," said Bela. The child said nothing. "I heard you," said Bela. "I have been hearing from you for a fortnight, and I did not come, and I am sorry for it." Nothing. The great eyes did not move. Bela crossed the room slowly and sat down on the floor beside the bed, which put her head lower than the child's, and stayed there without touching her and without speaking, and after some minutes a small, warm hand came out from under the blanket and took hold of 2 of her fingers and gripped and did not let go. They stayed like that until Bela's legs had gone dead under her. Then the door opened and a voice behind her said quite calmly, "You will come out of there this instant." Mrs. Grail was the nurse, about 50, narrow, very clean, in a starched apron at 3 in the morning, and not angry, which was the frightening part. She marched Bela down 2 flights into the housekeeper's room and lit the lamp herself. Mrs. Tarrant came down in her wrapper and heard it out with her hands folded. "I told you the first night," she said. "You told me I had dreamed it. I told you what you were to say you had dreamed. There is a difference, and I think you know it." Bela stood in the middle of the little room with her feet freezing on the flags. "Ma'am, who is she?" It was Mrs. Grail who answered, in the flat voice of a woman reciting a page she has read many times. "That is Lady Alice Alden, daughter of His Grace the Duke of Brantham, and of the late Duchess, who died bringing her into the world 3 years ago this January. She is fed at 7, at noon, and at 6. She is washed twice daily. She is warm, and she is clean, and she has everything a child of her rank requires." "She does not speak," said Bela. Mrs. Grail's chin came up 1/2 an inch. "She is wanting," she said. "It has been seen by 2 physicians. Dr. Selby of Harley Street has written it out plain. There is nothing behind those eyes. She will never speak and never be sensible, and the kindest thing anybody can do for that child is to keep her quiet and warm and out of the way." Bela heard the whole speech through. Then she said, "She held my hand." "She takes hold of things," said Mrs. Grail. "So does a monkey." "And that," said Mrs. Tarrant, closing the book on the table, "is the end of it. You will not go up those stairs again. Not because I am cruel, because His Grace has given an order about that wing, and there is not a servant in this house who will risk the whole establishment for a girl who came off the road 3 weeks ago with no character. Do you understand me?" "Yes, ma'am," said Bela. She went back to her bed under the roof and lay in the dark, with her hand still remembering the grip of 2 small fingers. There is nothing behind the eyes. She had been 11 when a woman from the parish board said something very like that in front of her about a boy in the next bed, and the boy had heard it and understood every word and was never afterward the same. A child of 3 who did not cry out when a stranger opened her door at 3 in the morning, who did not call, who took hold of a hand and held it for 1/2 an hour as though she were drowning. That was not a wanting child. Bela had seen wanting children. That was a child who had learned, very young and very thoroughly, that making a noise brings nobody, and had therefore stopped. And Bella Hart, who had £9 a year, and no character and no living relation on the earth, lay in the dark and made a decision she knew perfectly well might put her back on the road inside a month. She began the next night. She went up at 10:30 when the house had settled, and did not touch the child and did not pick her up, because she had a notion that being handled was the one thing Alice had had plenty of. She sat on the floor by the bed with her candle, and she talked. "That is a candle," she said, "candle. And this is my hand. Hand. And that you are holding, that is a blanket, and it is blue, and blue is a color, and there are others, and I will tell you all of them by and by." She had nothing else to give. No toys, no money, no schooling to speak of. What she had was words, and the hours between 10:30 and midnight, and the obstinate patience of a person who has been told all her life to be quiet. She went up the next night, and the next. She named the fender and the window and the rain. She named her own face, feature by feature. She sang very low, because she had a true small voice, and nobody had ever asked her not to. And on the 11th night, she took out her mother's tin whistle and played 4 notes on it, and Alice Alden turned her head. That was all. She turned her head toward the sound. But Bella sat in that cold nursery and had to press her sleeve against her mouth, because a child who is wanting does not turn her head toward a tune she has never heard. She was caught in the 2nd week of November, and it was not Mrs. Grail who caught her. She was coming down the east stairs at midnight with her candle guttering, and the painted door at the bottom was open, and standing in the passage beyond it, still in his evening coat, with his hat in his hand as though he had come in from somewhere and not yet given it to anybody, was the Duke of Brantham. Bela stopped 4 steps up. Nobody moved for a length of time she could not afterward measure. He was looking at the stairs behind her, not at her. At the stairs, the way a man looks at deep water. "Who are you?" he said. "Bella Hart, your grace." "Scullery, scullery, yes, your grace. And what is a scullery maid doing on those stairs at midnight?" There was one answer that would keep her position, and it was a lie, and Bella had promised Mrs. Tarrant at the door that she would not tell one. "I have been going up to your daughter, sir," she said, "every night for a fortnight. I sit on the floor and I talk to her, because nobody talks to her, and I know what happens to a child that nobody talks to. I have not touched her without leave, and I have not taken one thing out of that room. And I am very sorry to have disobeyed you, but I am not sorry I went." She waited to be dismissed. He did not dismiss her. He stood in the passage with his hat in his hand, and something went across his face that she was too frightened to read at the time, and understood perfectly well 2 years later. He had gone white about the mouth. "Does she?" he said, and stopped. "Sir." "Nothing," said the Duke of Brantham. He put his hat down on the hall table very carefully, as though it might break. "Go to bed." "Am I turned off, sir?" He did not answer that either. He walked away down his own passage, and Bella stood on the 4th step with her candle burning down over her fingers, and it was a full minute before she understood that the man had not been angry with her at all. Richard Alden had married Eleanor Merrick when he was 26 and she 23, and it was a perfectly proper match on paper, and an entirely improper one, in fact, because they liked each other extremely, and neither family had thought that necessary. She was not a beauty, and she was not tidy. She left books face down all over his houses, which he told her ruined them, and she told him a book that is not ruined has not been read. She hated London. She laughed at him in company, quietly, without moving her face, in a way that could silence him at his own table. In 7 years they had one great quarrel about a horse, and neither could afterward remember who had won it. She carried 3 children and lost 2, and when she came to the 3rd, she was 30 and the doctors were grave, and she was perfectly cheerful and made him play cards every evening for 9 weeks. On the night of the 16th of January, in the great bedroom at the country house, Eleanor Alden held onto his sleeve with a strength that surprised him and made him promise 2 things. The first was that he was not to sit about grieving because it was tedious and she should hate to be tedious. The second was this: Richard, do not let her be brought up by strangers, he promised. Of course he promised. Men promise anything in that room. She died at 10 minutes past 4 in the morning, and the child lived, and Richard Alden went out into the January garden in his shirt sleeves and stood in the frost until a footman came and led him in. He had meant to keep the promise. In the beginning, he meant it the way you mean a thing you have not yet had to do. But every time he went near the room where the child was, the whole of that January came up his throat, and the sight of the small, red, furious face on the nurse's shoulder did a thing to him he had no name for and could not survive twice. So he went out of the room, and then out of the house, and then into the business of being a duke, which is a great deal of business, and will hide a man completely if he lets it. And by the time he came out of it, a year had gone, and then a second, and the thing had set like mortar. There was a nurse. There was money. There were doctors. Dr. Selby of Harley Street had come twice and said the word wanting, and Richard heard it from the far side of the room with his back turned, and thought, with a clarity that shamed him the rest of his life, well then, there is nothing to be done, and nobody can say I have failed at anything, because there was never anything to be done. He had not been up the east stairs in 2 years and 7 months. He knew what he was. That was the part nobody guessed. The county thought him proud, and the town thought him cold. And Richard Alden knew perfectly well that he was a coward about exactly one thing in the world, and that he lived at the top of his own house, and that he passed the door of it every day of his life. And now a scullery maid with no character had stood on his stairs at midnight and told him she had been going up because nobody else would. He did not sleep that night. He sat in his study with the fire dying and thought, over and over, the same 4 words in Eleanor's voice, in that room, with her hand shutting on his sleeve. Not by strangers, Richard. He did not send for Bella. He did not go up. He did something that was, for a man like that, a great deal harder. He began to stand at the bottom of the stairs. Nan saw him first and would not believe her own eyes, and told Bella in the passage in a whisper that made no sense at all. He is behind the painted door, just standing there. In the dark, Bella, with no candle. He was there the next night and the night after. On the 4th he was still there when she came down, and he spoke to her. "What do you do up there?" "I talked to her, sir." "About what?" "About anything at all," said Bella. "Whatever is in the room, the rain, the rug. Yesterday I named every finger on her hand and told her what each one is for." "And does she answer?" "No, sir." "Then," said the Duke of Brantham in a voice she could not read, "what is the good of it?" Bella set her candle on the step because her hand had begun to shake, and she did not want him to see it. "Sir, when I was small, I was in a place where a person could go a whole day and nobody would say her name, not once. And after a great while of that, you begin to think you are not properly there, that you are only a thing in a room, like the fender." She looked at him. "I do not know whether she will speak. Nobody knows that. But she will know she is there. That is what talk is for. It is not for answers. It is for telling somebody they are in the world." The Duke did not say anything for a long moment. Then he said, "Go on doing it." And after a moment, in quite a different voice, "Does she sleep?" "Not well, sir." He nodded once and went away, and left her standing in the passage with her candle at her feet. After that it became a thing they did, though neither of them ever once called it anything. Bela went up at 10:30. She came down at midnight, and more nights than not, the Duke of Brantham was standing in the dark behind the painted door at the bottom of his own stairs, and she told him what had happened, and he listened, and he did not go up. She told him the child had taken a spoon off the tray and put it back. She told him in the second week of December that Alice had reached out and touched her mouth while she was talking, and held her fingers there, and Bela did not say aloud what she thought that meant. He asked questions, bad ones at first, the questions of a man who has never had charge of a child, then better ones. Does she like the whistle, or does she only hear it? She likes it, sir. How do you know? Because when I stop she goes still, said Bela, and she waits. And Richard Alden stood in the dark and put the back of his hand against his own mouth so the girl on the stairs would not hear him. The household knew, of course. Servants always know. The strange thing, and Bela did not understand it until much later, was that the household closed round the whole business like a hand. Mrs. Tarrant, who had forbidden it, began leaving a plate under a cloth in the passage at 10 o'clock and never said one word about it. Nan took over half of Bela's pans so she could be finished by 10 and not fall asleep on the nursery floor. Boyce, the butler, who had been in that family since he was a boy, took to trimming the lamp on the east landing himself every evening without being told, and if any footman asked him why, he said a dark stare was a broken neck waiting to happen, and dared him with his eyebrows to say anything further. Only Mrs. Grail held out, cold and clean and correct, and wrote in her weekly report to Dr. Selby that the child was unchanged. On the 9th of January, a week before the anniversary that nobody in that house named aloud, it happened. Bela had brought up a saucer of milk pudding because Mrs. Tarrant had begun letting her, and Alice had eaten 4 spoonfuls, and Bela had taken the saucer away and set it on the floor beside her, and was in the middle of saying, "And that is your knee, and this is my knee, and knees are for climbing on." And Alice Alden looked at the saucer on the floor, and then at Bela, and said quite distinctly, in a small, rusty voice that had never in 3 years been used for anything, "More." Bela did not move. She sat on that floor with her mouth open and her heart going like a hammer, and thought very stupidly that if she moved, it would turn out not to have happened. "More," said Alice again, louder, and thumped the blanket with the flat of her hand, and looked cross, and looked exactly and entirely like a furious, ordinary 3-year-old child who wants more pudding and cannot think why she has not got it. Bela picked up the saucer with both hands, because one hand would not have been steady enough, and fed her the rest of it, spoonful by spoonful, and said, "Yes, yes. Here it is. More. That is the word. That is the very best word there is." And then she went out onto the dark landing and put her back against the wall and cried the way she had not cried since she was 7 years old. She came down the stairs at 11:15, and the painted door was ajar, and he was there. "Sir?" said Bela. Richard Alden looked at her face and went absolutely rigid, because a man whose wife has died in a January does not see a woman come down those particular stairs weeping without one thought going through him first. "She is well," said Bela quickly. "Sir, she is well, she is perfectly well, nothing is wrong." She stopped and put her hands over her mouth for a second and took them away. She spoke. "Let us pause here for just a moment. If this story has hold of you, please take a second to subscribe to the channel so the next one finds you. Now, let us go on." He did not say anything for so long that Bela began to be frightened. "What did she say?" said the Duke of Brantham. "She said more, sir. She wanted more pudding, and she said more, and she thumped the bed at me because I was slow about it." Bela laughed, and it came out wrong, half a sob. "She was cross, sir. She was properly cross with me. 3 years old and cross about her supper like anybody." Richard Alden put out one hand and set it flat against the wall of his own passage and stood like that. Then he said, "Take me up, sir. Take me up now before I think about it." They went up the east stairs together, the maid in front with the candle and the Duke of Brantham behind her in his shirt-sleeves, and he stopped twice on the way, and Bela waited without turning round, because she thought that being looked at just then would finish him. She opened the nursery door, and it went wrong. Of course it went wrong. Bela had not thought, and she never afterward forgave herself for it. Alice Alden was 3 years old and had, in the whole of her life, seen 4 faces. And into her one warm-lit room at 11 at night came a tall, dark man she had never laid eyes on, who filled the doorway and who was, though the child could not have known it and knew it perfectly well, shaking. She screamed. It was the first loud sound Bela had ever heard her make, and it was pure terror, and the child went backward into the corner of the bed with the blanket dragged up and screamed and screamed. Richard did not move. He stood in that doorway and took it, with a face like a man standing in a gale, and then he turned and went down the stairs without a word. Bela got the child quiet in 20 minutes, then left her sleeping and went down and found him in the passage with his hand over his eyes. "Sir," she said. "Do not," said the Duke. "She is frightened of a stranger in the dark, sir. That is all in the world it is. She would scream at Mrs. Tarrant. She would scream at the king." "I am not a stranger," said Richard Alden. "I am her father." And he laughed once, and it was the worst sound Bela ever heard a man make. There is no difference at all, is there? Not to her. 2 years and 7 months, and there is no difference between me and a man off the street. Bella Hart was a scullery maid speaking to a duke, and what she said next could have put her on the road that night. And she said it anyway because she had learned in the workhouse that there is a moment when a person decides what they will be for the rest of their life, and it lasts about 4 seconds. "Then be a stranger who comes back," she said. He took his hand down from his eyes. "That is the whole of it. Anybody can be a stranger once. Come back tomorrow. Come back the day after. Stand in the door and do not touch her and do not speak to her and let her look at you until you are dull. That is what I did. I was a stranger 11 nights, and then I was furniture, and then I was a person, and that is the order it goes in. And there is no way to hurry it and no way round it." The Duke of Brantham looked at her in the light of one candle, in his own back passage, at midnight, in his shirt sleeves. "You have a great deal of nerve," he said. "I have nothing else, sir," said Bella. "It has to do." He came back the next night and stood in the doorway with his hands behind him and said nothing whatever for a quarter of an hour. And Alice watched him from the bed the entire time like a cat watching a door, and did not scream. He came the night after that and sat down on the floor just inside the door, which for a man of his height and his coat was an absurd thing to do, and Bella went on naming things and did not look at him. By the end of January he was allowed as far as the fender. In the second week of February, Alice Alden crossed the rug with a wooden horse in her fist and stood in front of her father and held it out to him and waited. Richard took it. His hand was not steady. "Thank you," he said. The child looked at him a moment longer and then went back to the rug and sat down with her back against his boot, which was, Bella understood, the whole of it, and the end of the argument, and a thing no doctor in Harley Street had thought possible. Winter went out slowly that year. They had by March an entirely improper arrangement, and every soul below stairs knew of it, and not one breathed a syllable outside that house. Mrs. Tarrant had taken Bella out of the scullery in December and put her in the nursery at £12 a year, and told her that if she thanked anybody for it, she would be put back. Mrs. Grayle had given notice in a fury in January and gone to a family in Bath, and had not been replaced. And the Duke of Brantham came up the east stairs nearly every evening at 6, and sat on the floor of a nursery with his daughter and talked to a housemaid. They talked because there was nobody else in the world who cared about the same thing. He asked her once what she had wanted when she was small. "To be let alone," said Bela. "And then, when I was about 14, to be wanted somewhere. Not fussed over, just wanted, so that if I did not come back it would be noticed. And now." Bella thought about it honestly, because she had discovered that he could always tell. "Now I want her to have 100 words by the summer," she said. "And I would like to see the sea, and I would like, one day, to be paid enough that I am not frightened of being ill." Richard Alden said, "You may see the sea in July. We went to Kingsmere." "That is not what I meant, sir." "I know it is not," he said. He talked to her about Eleanor. Nobody had heard him say his wife's name aloud in 3 years, and now he said it 2 or 3 times an evening, easily, the way you say the name of somebody who was in the room a moment ago. He told her about the books left face down and the horse they quarrelled over. And one evening in March, with Alice asleep, he told her about the promise and the January garden, and a man standing at a window with his back to a room while a physician said the word wanting and being glad of it. "I have never said that to a living soul," he said. "No, sir. Do you think less of me?" Bella considered it properly, which was the only kind of answer she ever gave him. "I think you were not a wicked man," she said. "You were a frightened one, and frightened people do great harm and then cannot look at what they did, and then do more harm not looking." She folded her hands. "And I think you came up those stairs. Most do not. I have known a great many people who never came up the stairs." He looked at her across the little room for a long moment, and something happened in that look that neither of them said anything about for another 5 weeks. Lady Sophia Merrick came to Brantham House on the 2nd of April. She was Eleanor's elder sister, 41, widowed 6 years, handsome in the sharp way that runs in some families, and she came on the same errand as every April since her sister died, which was to sit a quarter of an hour with a child who did not know her and weep in the carriage afterward. And Bela, who had not been in the house in any previous April, made a mistake that changed everything. She brought Alice down. She had reasoned it out entirely wrong. The child had 160 words by then and had begun to laugh, which was a sound the upper servants would go out of their way in the passage to hear. And Bela Hart, who had never had a family and did not know the first thing about how families work, thought, "This poor lady comes every year to a silent room, and this year I shall give her something." She washed Alice and put her in a clean frock, and brought her down to the yellow drawing-room and said, "My lady, this is Alice. And Alice, this is your aunt." And Alice Alden looked up at the woman with her mother's face and said, "Hello." Lady Sophia Merrick sat perfectly still. Then she put her hand over her mouth and made a sound, and Bella, who was 22 and had a good heart and no understanding of the world whatsoever, thought that she had done a lovely thing. The interview with Richard took place an hour later in the library. Bella heard it that evening from Boyce, who had been at the door and told her because he thought she had better be warned. Sophia had asked one question first. "How long?" "Since January," Richard had said. "Since January. Since January, and I have had no letter. She spoke a whole word to me in that room, Richard. She said hello to me, and you have known since January." And then, before he could answer, the second question, which was the one that mattered. "Who is that girl?" "Her name is Bella Hart. She is in charge of the nursery. She is a housemaid, Richard. I know the look of one. She stands like one and speaks like one, and she is about 22, and she is alone at the top of your house every evening, and you go up. I go up to my daughter, and she is the reason your daughter speaks. Is she?" "Yes," said Richard Alden. There was considerable silence in the library. Then Lady Sophia said, in a voice Boyce reported as almost gentle, which was somehow the worst of it, "Richard, I shall say this once. That child is a duke's daughter and my sister's daughter. You gave her to servants for 3 years, and I said nothing because I thought you were dying of it, and because nothing could be done for a child who was wanting. Now it appears she was never wanting. She was neglected. In your house. On your order." She let that stand for a moment. "And your remedy is to hand her to a girl out of a workhouse with no character and no education, and to sit every evening on the nursery floor and to look at her, Richard, the way you are looking now when I merely say her name." "I will thank you for being careful," said Richard. "I am being careful, a great deal more careful than you are." Sophia stood up. "Send that girl away. Give me the child until the summer, and I will bring her back to you speaking and taught and in no danger at all. Do that, and none of this leaves this room. And if I do not, then I shall lay the whole of it before Chancery," said Lady Sophia Merrick, "and I shall win." A father's right is a great thing, Richard, but it is not absolute, and this very year a court in this city took 2 children from their own father on the grounds of the household he kept. 3 years of a physician's reports in your own steward's file, a nurse who left your service in a temper and will say anything I ask her, and a scullery maid dismissed for theft, sleeping at the top of your house. That last is a lie, and you know it is a lie. "It does not have to be true," said Sophia. "It only has to be said in a room with a wig in it." She drew on her gloves. "You have until midsummer. I do not want your money, and I do not want your title, and I am not enjoying one moment of this. I want my sister's child not to be raised by a workhouse girl. And I am sorry, Richard, but every person you will ever meet is going to agree with me." He told Bella himself that night, on the nursery floor, with the child asleep between them, because he had decided somewhere on the stairs that he was never going to be a man who managed her with silences. She heard the whole of it out. Then she said, "She is right, Bela. She is right about the 3 years. She is right that a court would hear it. And she is right that every person you will ever meet will agree with her, because I am what she says I am. I have no character. I was turned off for a theft I did not do, and there is not one soul on this earth who will stand up and say so." "I am not going to send you away," said Richard Alden. "Then she will take Alice." "She will not, because I shall fight her, and I have 4,000 a year more than she has, and better lawyers. And they will read out in a public room that the Duke of Brantham shut his own child up for 3 years, said Bela, "and every word of it will be true, and it will be printed, and Alice will read it when she's 15. She looked at him steadily. "I have thought about nothing else since 2 o'clock this afternoon." He was quiet for a long moment. And then he said the thing he had been not saying since March. "I am in love with you." Bela shut her eyes. "I know what I am saying, and what it costs. And I have known 3 months, and said nothing, because I could not see how to say it without it being an order. You may go on being what you are in this house, and I will never speak of it again. But I'm not going to have you leave this room believing I only wanted you for what you can do with my daughter, because it has not been true since the night you told me to be a stranger who comes back." Bella opened her eyes. She was 22. She had been told once by a woman from the parish board in her hearing that girls like her were fortunate to be fed. And a man who owned 4 houses had just said that to her on the floor of a nursery. "Sir," she said, and her voice was not working properly, "if I say what I want to say, they take her." "Bela." "They take her," she said again. "That is the whole of it. If I am your servant, they have half a case, and if I am anything else at all, they have the whole of it." She stood up. "And you know that, sir. You have known it since the library. You are only saying it now because you are a decent man, and you did not want me to go without knowing." She was at the door. "Where will you go?" said Richard Alden. Bella Hart, who had nowhere in the world to go, said, "Mrs. Tarrant has a sister in Cheapside who takes lodgers." And then, standing in the door of that lit room with the child asleep on the rug, she said the only other thing she had left. "Tell her I did not go, because I stopped wanting her. Tell her when she is old enough to understand it. Do not let her think it was that." She went that night. Alice Alden stopped speaking in 11 days. It was not sudden. It came off her the way colour comes off a cloth in the sun. First, she stopped asking. Then, she stopped answering. By the middle of May, she had gone back behind her own eyes, and she sat on the rug with the wooden horse in her fist and did not look up when the door opened, and Richard sat on that floor every evening for 6 weeks and talked to her about anything at all, and she did not turn her head. He wrote to Bela twice. She answered neither letter, which cost her more than anything she had ever done, because any letter of hers in his desk was one more paper for a lawyer. Lady Sophia Merrick came for the child on the 24th of June at 11 in the morning, with her attorney Mr. Prewitt in the carriage and Dr. Selby beside him, because she was a thorough woman and meant it was done properly and without a court, if it could be. It could be. Richard had already agreed. He had agreed a fortnight before in a letter of 4 lines, because a physician had come and looked at a silent child and said the word wanting for the 3rd time in 3 years, and because the alternative was a public room and a printed page, and his daughter reading it at 15. Alice was to be at Brantham House 1 month in every 3, and at Kingsmere in the summers. It was, everybody said, a very handsome settlement, and Sophia Merrick was behaving extremely well. They brought Alice down into the hall at 11:30, in a travelling cloak too warm for the day, and she came down quietly, holding nobody's hand, and stood in the middle of that pale floor, looking at nothing. Richard went down on one knee in front of his daughter, in front of his own servants and his sister-in-law, and 2 gentlemen from Harley Street and Lincoln's Inn, and took hold of both her hands. "I will come on the 14th, he said. "That is 19 days. 19. I will count them out for you on your fingers if you will let me." Alice did not look at him, and Nan, 17, 3rd housemaid, who had gone to Cheapside that morning on her own authority and run most of the way back, came through the door at the top of the area steps with her cap gone and no breath left in her, and behind her, in a grey stuff gown, having come the whole way in a fishmonger's cart because there was no other going at that hour, came Bela Hart. Boyce, the butler, 60 years in that family, stood aside and let her in. He never gave any account of it afterward, and nobody ever dared ask him. Sophia Merrick turned round. "This is precisely what I have prevented," she said. "Get her out of this house." Bela did not come any further in. She stopped just inside the door, because she had understood something on the way that she had not understood in April. She did not speak to Sophia, and she did not speak to Richard, and she did not hold out her arms. She stood still, and she said quite quietly across that hall, "Hello, Alice." The child's head came up. She looked at Bela for 3 seconds, and then she turned all the way round to the man kneeling on the floor beside her, and she put one hand flat on his chest, and she said, in a voice that had not been used in 6 weeks and had never in her life said this, "Papa." Nobody in that hall moved. "Papa," said Alice Alden again, and took hold of 2 fistfuls of his coat, and her face came apart, and she began to cry properly, loudly, furiously, the way a child cries when there is somebody to cry to. "Papa!" "No." Richard Alden put his arms round his daughter and his face down into her hair, and every servant in that hall looked hard at the floor. And Dr. Selby, who had written the word wanting 3 times over his own signature, took off his spectacles and did not put them back on. It was Sophia Merrick who broke. She had come there certain and right, and she had built her case out of true things, and she stood in that hall and watched a 3-year-old child pick her father out of a room and say his name, and everything she had been holding up came down at once. She said, "To nobody, she has Eleanor's chin." Then she sat down on the hall chair, which is a chair nobody sits on, and cried into her glove. Bela crossed the hall and knelt beside her, which no servant does either, and it was the 2nd time that morning the whole rule book of that house went out of the window. My lady, she had 160 words in April, and I do not know what she has today, because I have been away since. "I know when you went away," said Sophia into her glove. "I am not a fool. I know exactly what he did and why, and I have known since the day the letter came." "Then you know she is not neglected now," said Bela, "and will not be again, and there is nobody left in this house to fight." She waited. "My lady, she has one aunt. Only the one. I never had any at all, and I would have given every year of my life for one. Do not make her choose. Nobody wins that, and she is 3. Sophia Merrick lifted her head and looked at the girl kneeling beside her chair. You do not talk like a housemaid, she said. I talk like somebody who was in a place where nobody talked, my lady. It teaches you what talk is worth. The petition was never laid. Dr. Selby wrote one further letter, unasked, recording that he had been mistaken in the case of the Lady Alice Alden, that in his judgment the child had never been wanting in any degree whatever, and that he wished it to stand on the file. It cost him something to write. Richard kept it all his life. And Lady Sophia Merrick came to dinner in Grosvenor Street in July, and again in August, and by the following spring was writing to Bella directly about Alice's schooling, in a hand as sharp as a knife, signing herself without comment, your affectionate S. Merrick. It cost him, of course. He had said it would, and he was not wrong. The Duke of Brantham married Bella Hart at Kingsmere that September in the parish church with 14 people present, and the news went round London in about 9 days. There were houses that never invited him again. There was a paragraph in a paper, unsigned and very nasty, about a duke and a scullery maid. 2 men he had known at school cut him in the street, and one of them wrote him an apology 20 years later, which he answered civilly. He had thought about the whole of it for exactly 1 evening before he asked her. You will be stared at, he said. You will be asked questions with a hook in them by women who smile the entire time. There will be a year, perhaps 2, when it is very hard. I have been hungry, said Bela. I do not think I shall mind being stared at. And you will be told all your life by people who mean it kindly that you were very fortunate. Bella Hart considered that seriously, sitting on the nursery floor with her hands round her knees. I was, she said, extremely fortunate. Somebody left a door on the latch, and a girl heard a child crying and went up a staircase she'd been told not to go up. She looked at him. What I will not have is being told I was rescued. I have never once been rescued in my life. I got here. Yes, said Richard Alden. You did. Then ask me again, said Bella, and this time do it standing up so I may see your face when I say yes. They had 2 more children, a boy and then a girl, and neither of them was ever in the least surprised that their eldest sister could talk the hind leg off a donkey. Alice Alden grew up long and dark and clever and without fear of anybody, and at 17 she came out in London and was thought a little strange because she talked to people nobody talks to. Footmen and dressers, and the girls who bring the coals. At 20, she opened a school in Cheapside with her own money for children of 5 and under, and there was one rule written on the wall of it, and the woman who had taught her to speak chose the words. Speak to them. All day. Whether or not they answer, the tin whistle stayed in a drawer at Kingsmere for 60 years, and every child in that family learned 4 notes on it, and none was ever told why those 4 and not others, because their mother said it was not much of a story and would only be spoiled by telling. So here is what to carry away from this one, and it is not about dukes. Bela Hart had £9 a year, no family, no character, and nothing in her bundle but a comb and a tin whistle. She could not have gone to law. She had no name to lend anybody, and no money to spend on anybody, and no power of any kind at all. And she changed a child's entire life with the only thing she owned, which was her attention. That is the part people get wrong. We wait to be in a position to help. We wait until we have money, or standing, or time, or until somebody in authority says it is our business. And the whole while, the thing that actually saves people is sitting on a floor and speaking to somebody as though they are in the world. You have that. You have had it all along. It costs nothing. It is the rarest thing there is, and somewhere near you there is a person nobody says the name of. Go up the stairs. Thank you for staying with me all the way to the end of this story. If it moved you, please leave a like, and tell me in the comments which city or town you are watching from, and whether there was ever somebody who went up the stairs for you. I read everyone, And if you are new here, please subscribe so the next story finds you. I will see you there.